life-threatening. His 22-year-old female EMT partner, who was shot in the chest and arm, is serious but stable. The TFD captain, who was shot in the arm, was treated and released yesterday, and he's recovering at home. Now, one of the neighbors at the scene, who was grazed in the head by a round fired by the suspect, he did not require medical treatment at the hospital. So we're at the very beginning of an ongoing investigation with an incredibly complex set of facts. There's a great deal that we still don't know, and so as additional evidence is uncovered, we expect to learn more. But here's an overview of what we know at this time. At approximately 3:46 p.m. yesterday, Sunday, a call came in that a house was on fire on East Irene Vista in the city of Tucson. Tucson fire personnel responded and reported a vehicle following them into the neighborhood. At approximately 3:53 p.m., firefighters radioed shots fired. Less than 2 minutes later, firefighters radioed that a TFD captain had been shot. The gunman continued to shoot at firefighters as well as at neighbors who came out to help, ultimately shooting 2 neighbors, one who died at the scene. The deceased is 44-year-old Corey Saunders, and he is survived by his 11-year-old son who, to make things worse, witnessed the attack. Meanwhile, at approximately 3:55 p.m., a call came in that an AMR ambulance crew had been shot in Silver Lake Park, a little over a mile away, where they were standing by for an unrelated medical emergency. Now, to make this a little easier to understand, at this time, we believe the sequence of events went like this. The shooting suspect left the scene of the house fire and went to the park, where he shot the 2-person ambulance crew in an ambush attack. He then returned to the address on East Irene Vista, where he shot at firefighters and neighbors alike, basically anyone who was trying to help. The suspect then fled the scene again, ramming a Tucson police car that was responding to the incident. The officer in that car, Officer Danny Leone, 8-year veteran of the Tucson Police Department, immediately got out of his vehicle and took cover. The suspect then fired 3 rounds at the officer, who returned fire, striking the suspect. Officer Leone and other officers then rendered first aid to the suspect, who has been identified as Leslie Scarlett, a male, age 35. Mr. Scarlett has a criminal history that includes serving 6 years in prison for armed robbery. He also has a history of mental health issues. He is currently in the hospital in extremely critical condition. The fire was extinguished by the Tucson Fire Department, and unidentified human remains were found in the house. The mother of the 3 children who resided in the house on East Irene Vista is unaccounted for but presumed dead. There are far too many individuals with violent criminal intent and the means to injure and kill many people. Too often, first responders such as police, fire, and emergency medical services personnel become targeted for reasons that are unclear. Is it a vendetta, the uniform, the authority it represents, or just that police, fire, and EMS are the ones out in the field responding to crises and dealing with deeply troubled people day in and day out? The real question we should be asking is, how can we coordinate the work of our criminal justice and mental health systems to prevent these terrible attacks? Who are these ticking time bombs, and is there anything we can do working together instead of in silos to predict their level of risk? How does someone like the suspect in this case, a prohibited possessor, even come to have a firearm? There are many unanswered questions right now that need to be pursued further in the days to come. A 20-year-old EMT sitting in an ambulance in a park waiting to help with a totally unrelated medical call should not be fighting for his life in an ICU. His AMR EMT partner and a Tucson firefighter should not be dealing with the physical and mental trauma of gunshot wounds. If this incident isn't a call to action, I am really not sure what is. I'm beyond grateful that Officer Leon had the skill, the courage, and the presence of mind to address the threat that he encountered and to end this suspect's rampage. His actions serve as an important reminder of the critical role police play in protecting the public, and his ability to go from using deadly force to rendering first aid is remarkable, but not unusual for TPD officers. I also want to mention and particularly thank our partners at the ATF who sent personnel to the scene to help our officers in any capacity needed. And, of course, I appreciate our mayor for joining us here today, and she'll be making some remarks shortly. With that, we're going to play a piece of the audio from the fire department's radios, followed by, you're going to see a segment of the body-worn camera video from Officer Leon's perspective. And most of that will be what you hear rather than see because he was taking cover, which obscured most of the view. So we'll start with that.
Multiple callers reporting house on fire, tank coming out the window, neighbors trying to see if anybody's inside, yelling, "Fire, 911, bring the red car, I find police." Jet 911, east 482, subgrade district, the town of additional jet can be made from, I have 911. And that's approach, we got some also. That's kind of like, that is where you were, is like, got Casualty, real fast, so I think. That's right, thank you. It's 10 just we have a single-story, single-family residential, small. We got smoke showing from the front of the house, single-story, masonry constructed, got a pitched asphalt shingle roof. It's not going to be one to connect for primary search and fire attack. Shot fired, code 99, we got shots being fired. No units come to the scene, any stat. All units of the 911, make sure we stay away from the scene for instance, do not approach into the scene, but remain away from the scene. Agent Taylor, the tag, why you guys did not safely go to that scene? We got one patient down, we're going to be clearing the scene. The tag on copy. 911, you copy, code 99. That's perfect. Hey, the fire, we're getting your shot. The fire, you're being shot at. Black Tampa, the 911, you guys are looking for that scene safely. Fire from the 911, go ahead and start me a major medical as well. Sure, 911. Fire from the 911, just with the additional medic trucks, please. Sure. But now I want to just be working along the street here, the middle traffic. I don't want to. I got it too. Station 1 units are in the area stage at Tucson Marketplace and Keno Parkland. Go ahead, like 10. John, 1 in 10. Agent Taylor. 1 in 10 have been shot. Cruiser stopped. I got that, Agent Taylor. Where are you located at? Still into a house. Stand by. There's still shots going on right now. The 911 copy. Fire alarm from the 911. We have TPD and house code rate. Got it, perfect. So they have multiple units now. Go find that interruption route. Subject in the 2030s, black male, front of the firearm, is shooting. Command, this is Rotterdam. I have my engineers and 1 firefighter from Independent Attacking Medic Center. We split the scene. I'm missing both of my firefighters. I copy that. Which firefighters will be missing? It's right, it was Larson. I'm missing. From the 911, do you copy? The firefighter. From Larson. Are you code 4, sir? And code 4. Do you copy? With you. Firefighter. Our president again. I copy that. Engine 10 from the 911. still holding the pistol in his right hand. Command, copy, fire alarm. This is command. We will relay information to UP, please. Command, be advised, we have the shooter on Campbell. He's shooting at the cops right now. We're backing up. He just did a cop car. Shooter the cops. Shooter is down. The cops shot him. I copy that. Shooter is down. Cop shot him.
And now we'll show the body-worn camera video from the officer involved, Officer Leon. There is a 30-second delay without volume because that just happens with body-worn cameras. There's a 30-second delay once it's turned on where you'll see the video but you won't hear the audio.
no. You stick with me, get my car over here. You can go over there. Give me a nice bro. I think, Sarge is carrying more gunshots. I don't know what's going on in the house. He's over there by the house, by the way.
All right, so just to be clear again, the 30-second portion at the start, no audio because that's typical and standard for all of the body-worn camera footage. We can answer questions about what you saw after we hear from the other speakers. So we're going to start off with Mayor Romero.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you all for being here today. The representatives of AMR and Chief Ryan, I extend my deepest condolences to the families of the deceased, including a good Samaritan who was simply responding to a neighbor in need before being shot and killed. The events that took place yesterday afternoon near Silver Lake Park and the surrounding neighborhood were horrific. Plain and simple, violent and horrific. I ask the Tucson community to keep those that were injured in our prayers for their recovery, including 2 EMTs from American Medical Response, AMR, and our own captain from the Tucson Fire Department. I want to applaud the professionalism of the women and men at the Tucson Fire Department and the Tucson Police Department in continuing to carry out their duties and proceed with the investigation under difficult and somber circumstances. As your mayor, you have my full support with any needs that arise, and know that you are not alone during this difficult time. There are still many unanswered questions, and we must allow the investigation to play its course. While the specific circumstances surrounding yesterday's events were extraordinary, they are a reminder of the dangers that first responders from both Tucson Police Department and the Tucson Fire Department regularly face. Officer Danny Leon responded immediately to the scene, knowing that he would be entering harm's way. Despite his car being rammed and gunshots being fired directly at him, he demonstrated incredible composure and bravery in neutralizing the threat. His actions were heroic and likely saved lives. We have faced many challenges during this pandemic together as a community. One challenge that has emerged since the pandemic started in cities across the country, including Tucson, is a rise in crime, homicides, and instances of gun violence. I look forward to working with Chief Magnus, Chief Ryan, and the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force that I have assembled to explore expanding existing efforts and making necessary investments in violence prevention strategies, focusing on neighborhoods where we see violence occurring the most. We must take action to address immediate needs while working simultaneously on long-term solutions to interrupt cycles of violence. Thank you for all of our first responders, for your courage and service to our community every single day. You are on the front lines of keeping our community safe, and for that, our community owes you a debt of gratitude. I am ready to work with our community, with Chief Ryan and Chief Magnus, to make sure that this violence comes to an end here in Tucson. Thank you all so much, and I'm looking forward to additional answers such as the community, just like the community is. Thank you, Chief Ryan and Chief Magnus, for inviting me today, and for all of you coming to listen to us, and for your support.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, for your thoughtful remarks. Now we'll hear from our Fire Chief, Chief Ryan.
Thanks, Chief. What you just heard, that radio traffic could not, and I say this hesitatingly, is difficult at best. It's about the 8th time I've heard it since hearing it live yesterday. I could not be more proud of our men and women. This is so far out of the realm of what is normal that it's unconscionable, and it's difficult to not be intensely angry about what occurred. It's trying to make sense of a senseless act like this is almost futile. But what I can tell you is that our captain, our crews did exactly what they're trained to do. We train with our partners at Tucson Police to respond to active shooter incidents. We don't train to be a part of them. And our crew found themselves in the midst of this horrific mess yesterday. Our captain handled himself and his crew with professionalism and true leadership, maintaining a sense of composure and calm that I'm not sure that I could have. I spoke to him this morning. He was treated yesterday at Banner UMC, and it was great to hear his voice this morning. He went home last night to his wife and family, and I can tell you he's extremely humble and said, "Chief, it's just a superficial wound." There's nothing superficial about getting shot, okay? And so what I've told our members is that we will be there to support them. Chief Magnus, we have a robust peer support team. We work with the U of A and Dr. Patricia Haynes for behavioral health support, and Chief Magnus has graciously offered the assistance of TPD's behavioral health support unit to our members that need it. We respond to over 90,000 calls for service in this city every year. We will continue to do so. We will continue to serve this community professionally and proudly, but I will have to tell you that it's an incident like this that can shake your trust a little bit, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get back to good, as they say. I've had the good fortune to have been contacted by fire chiefs from across the country, from major metropolitan cities, some colleagues in Canada as well, some of whom have gone through this with much more tragic outcomes. Having that support network is good as a chief officer, because I think, as Chief Magnus would join me in saying, there's no more empty and helpless feeling than when you're listening to your crews in peril on the radio and you can't do anything about it. I also want to make sure we thank our Public Safety Communications Department. All too often our dispatchers and call takers who handle these events get forgotten in the mix, and I want to make sure they're recognized, because they also demonstrated extreme composure under duress. And I do want to thank the members of the community along that street who took our members in. I think you heard in the radio traffic that several members took refuge in some homes. It's only by the good grace of those neighbors that sheltered our co-workers that they were safe. Thank you.
Okay, our colleagues from AMR will be here as part of the question answering if necessary. And as I indicated, well, actually, as Chief Ryan indicated, we want to absolutely appreciate our colleagues over at the Public Safety Communications Department. It is its own department in the city of Tucson. Their director, Chad Kazmar, is with us, but we couldn't do it without dispatchers that can remain calm, that can provide a multitude of services under the most complicated and challenging situations where there's so much going on. So we really valued them. All right, so with that, just keeping in mind that we really have limited information that we can answer questions about. we'll be happy to take a few and see what we can do. And I have several folks here with me from our investigative division that can help with that, including, as I said, Assistant Chief John Strader. So we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Chief, do you have any indication that this man's actions may have been connected in any way to a fire earlier this year where his mother died, and this fire was in a structure that was immediately across the street from the house that burned yesterday?
So we don't have any indications of that, but that is something that we'll be exploring, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Is that fire that you mentioned being currently investigated as an arson?
That fire investigation is already concluded, and so, again, we're not sure what the connection, if any, might be, but again, that's something we'll absolutely be looking into further.
The woman's body was found, the burned body. Any indication of how that person died?
So, just to be clear, we can't definitively place a sex or identity to what are essentially remains, badly charred remains in the residence. There is a strong presumption that that body is, the person of relationship in the house, but it's not 100% confirmed at this time.
Can you speak to how that person died, though?
We can't, other than there was obviously fire involved, but until an autopsy is conducted, we won't be able to speak to that.
And what would be the relationship between that person, or I guess, I'll say this, the mother of the children that's missing right now, what would be her relationship with this suspect?
And again, that's not clear with certainty. We're interviewing and talking with family members to learn more, but right now that's not clear. Yes?
Is there any indication that the firefighters were specifically targeted? I know at the beginning you kind of mentioned they were followed into the neighborhood. Is there any indication of that?
Right now, again, that's not something we're clear on. We know that actually firefighters, EMTs, and police officers were all subject to the violence from this individual. So whether or not anybody was specifically targeted based on, their job remains unclear.
So at this point, motive is still really unknown, right? That's the key thing that's being investigated.
That's right. Motive is unknown right now. Something we'll definitely be pursuing. Yes?
Have officers spoken to the suspect yet?
I don't know. The suspect, though, is in critical condition, so I'm guessing the answer to that is no. But beyond just what you heard at the scene while medical treatment was being delivered, I think it's highly unlikely since he is in CCU in critical condition.
Chief, it's pretty clear that he was trying very hard to keep anyone from assisting anyone associated with the fire, either to rescue anybody in the building or to help to interfere with firefighters. And also, can you tell us more about the weapon?
So really it is not clear what his intentions were, because he was shooting at people, both neighbors and firefighters. So his intentions remain unclear. And at this point, we're not identifying the weapon, but there will be analysis done on it, and we will be working with the ATF on that.
Chief, you mentioned he was a prohibited possessor. Why was he a prohibited possessor, and do you have any clues as to how he therefore got a weapon?
Prohibited possessor based on his 6 years in prison for armed robbery and other criminal history. And no, we don't know how he got the weapon, and that'll be something that we'll be pursuing further in the future, absolutely.
Chief, was the prison time in Arizona or elsewhere?
I don't know the answer to that question.
What kind of charges would he be facing?
At this point, that hasn't been determined.
Fire Chief, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I talked to a couple of the witnesses at the scene. They said one of those, it sounds like 2 firefighters, if I'm understanding this correctly, weren't able to get back onto the truck, if I listened to that correctly. trained in that exact situation. That's not their main focus, their training. Can you speak to some of the heroism of what they went through?
Sure. You know, it's, like I said, we train to respond to active shooter incidents, not be a participant in them. The goal at that point is survival, right? We work in teams. We work in teams of 2 on our medic trucks, 4 on our ladder trucks and engine companies, and the team is paramount, and so nobody gets left behind. And it's that survival instinct took over. Some sought shelter in the first medic unit that was arriving on scene, and they left the scene. The captain, whose voice you heard on the radio from Engine 10, ordered his crew to just run in 4 different directions, just to split up. The ladder captain, the perpetrator was actively moving around the ladder truck to shoot at them. That's the radio traffic you heard from Ladder 10's captain. Same thing, you know, getting his members to safety. So, yeah, I like you said, I do consider those heroic acts for sure, because it's, like I said, it's so far afield from normal.
Do we know if the 2 EMTs at the park that were stationed at the park, did any good Samaritans at the park render aid to them while they were waiting for some more help?
We have no information to indicate that there were other people in the immediate area of them. They were basically parked in the middle of a parking lot that was pretty much empty. So that's something obviously we'll be looking into, but to the best of our knowledge at this point, there was nobody else around their vehicle. Yes.
Because the EMTs were there for a separate call, do we know if the suspect finding them was happenstance, or if there was some relation to their separate call to why the suspect ended up at their unit?
We don't know that.
Any indication of how the house fire started, or if it will be investigated as arson?
Well, it will be investigated, and I think for arson, among other things, but we don't know how it started. Okay, I don't hear anything else, so thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.